We've reached the mid-season break, and it's time to rank the drivers based on their performance so far. There are some drivers that are starting to prove themselves, and there are others that are definitely underperforming so far this season. So let's have a look at my rankings. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Number 20, Nicolas Latifi. Nicolas Latifi is a driver that sits 20th in my rankings. The driver has had a poor start to the season and is significantly behind his teammate Alex Albon. Latifi has made many mistakes this year, and he's cost the Williams team both in terms of development time and development budget. He's also struggled to adapt to the new regulations of cars, hence his performances early on in particular weren't all that convincing. His season highlight so far is the strong performance at Silverstone, where he got through to Q3 while Albon failed to get out of Q1. He then drove well, but didn't have the pace to stay in the top 10. Other than that performance, he's been poor, and not really driving at the standard you'd expect from somebody in their third season in Formula 1. Number 19, Lance Stroll. The next driver on this list is Lance Stroll, another driver that's been rather unconvincing so far in 2022. Aston Martin haven't got off to the best start in the new regulations, and Stroll has certainly struggled more than Sebastian Vettel so far this year. The Canadian driver has had 4 10th place finishes so far, and he scored 4 points to Vettel's 16. There is some momentum building at Aston Martin, and Stroll has been more consistent coming into the summer break. But for the rest of 2022, the driver needs to seize any opportunities he has to get further up the order and get some of those higher scoring points positions. Number 18, Daniel Ricciardo. Next up is Daniel Ricciardo, the McLaren driver that struggled to adapt last year, and even with a new car, he's continued to be shown up by Lando Norris. The gap between these two drivers is one of the largest of any team so far in 2022, as Ricciardo's on 19 points to Norris's 76. This year was all about the Australian driver proving himself. Last year could be put aside, and he could start delivering those results that we saw at both Renault and Red Bull. But it hasn't exactly gone to plan. Ricciardo's best result of 6th came at the Australian Grand Prix, but with McLaren locked in a close battle with Alpine for 4th in the standings, he's not exactly helping the team compete with their rivals. Ricciardo has been disappointing for 2 seasons in a row now, and it's difficult to see McLaren keeping hold of the driver for 2024 and beyond if he doesn't improve soon, and there's even talk that he might lose his seat even sooner. Number 17, Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly is another driver that's been relatively disappointing in my view so far this year. Gasly was a high flyer in these rankings throughout 2021 as he delivered excellent results for AlphaTauri. At the time, his stock was incredibly high in the sport, and many people were looking at his future and where he could go. People were even suggesting he could be promoted to Red Bull or be in line for a Mercedes seat in the future. But this season things have changed, and with AlphaTauri looking less competitive in 2022, I think Gasly has been disappointing compared to where he's been in the past. So far, Gasly has scored just 3 point scoring finishes, with a 5th place in Azerbaijan being his highlight, a circuit where Gasly has been strong in the past. He remains ahead of Yuki Sonoda in the standings, but I think the context is important. Gasly should be well ahead of his less experienced teammate. So overall, I think he's dropped back this year, and he needs to take advantage whenever AlphaTauri has a car that can compete in the last 9 rounds. Gasly is signed to AlphaTauri for next year, and I think his future in the sport very much depends on how well he performs. You'd like to think he would be wanted by many teams, but that's potentially at risk after his 2022 season so far. Number 16, Yuki Tsunoda. And speaking of AlphaTauri drivers, next up is Yuki Tsunoda. The Japanese driver is attempting to keep his seat on the grid for next year in a historically ruthless driver academy, and there are many Red Bull youngsters driving in Formula 2 right now. For me, I think Tsunoda's performances have been strong relative to Pierre Gasly. Certainly earlier on in the year he did very well, but he and the team have been dropping back through the season as the development race has been shaking up the midfield order. Overall though, I've been relatively impressed with Tsunoda's performances this year. He's been much closer to Gasly, and it shows that he is developing as a driver. I think he's got to improve further to ensure he maintains his spot on the grid in the long run, especially with so much competition in the Red Bull Academy. But he deserves some recognition for his performances so far this year. Number 15, Mick Schumacher. The next driver is one that's almost had the opposite trajectory so far this year. Schumacher struggled in the first few races with 2 significant crashes in Saudi Arabia and Monaco. These crashes were costly for the team as they split the car into 2 pieces on both occasions. There were signs that perhaps Schumacher was overdriving and feeling the pressure, having not scored points in his F1 career so far. But it was in Canada that he had a breakthrough result with an excellent qualifying performance to get to 6th on the grid, only to end up retiring through that race. The points did arrive though, as he came 8th at Silverstone and 6th at the Red Bull Ring. The Haas team have been doing well to remain competitive this season, and there's no doubt that Schumacher's confidence is growing. Number 14, Zhou Guanyu. 14th next, and I think Zhou Guanyu has been very impressive for his rookie season. He's had a huge amount of bad luck, which explains some of the gap between him and Valtteri Bottas, but overall he's adapted well to the Formula 1 environment. He's been confident in the races, and he's been close in terms of qualifying. I think with the money that Joest sponsors offer, there's a good chance we could see him on the grid for a few more seasons, especially with some teams wanting or maybe even needing that cash injection to secure their futures and progress up the order. For me, Zhou is the best pay driver in the sport right now, and with a couple more years of development, he might keep his seat on merit. Number 13, Alex Albon. This year is critical for Alex Albon. He got dropped by Red Bull at the end of 2020 in a move that was clearly worth it for the team given how valuable Sergio Perez was through the championship fight of 2021. To be given a lifeline by Williams was fortunate for Albon, and he seized that opportunity. He's managed to drag that Williams car into unlikely positions, and races such as the one in Australia where he did all but one lap on a single set of tyres shows that he and the team are willing to take risks in order to get closer to points and move up the order. The Williams team is not competitive this year, but he's building relationships there, and I think we could see him working there for the foreseeable future. Number 12, Sebastian Vettel. Next up is a driver that's retiring at the end of 2022. Sebastian Vettel is in his final year in the sport, and this year he scored the lion's share of Aston Martin's points, as I discussed earlier. Vettel has certainly got the most out of his Aston Martin car so far, and that's what you'd expect from a four-time world champion. As with Stroll, there's some promising signs of consistency for Aston Martin, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in Vettel's final 9 races in the sport. Number 11, Kevin Magnussen. Magnussen next, and he's really hit the ground running at the start of the year after being given a lifeline to return to Formula 1 with Haas. The Danish driver came 5th in that opening round in Bahrain and showed what the Haas car was capable of. Initially, he was comfortably beating Schumacher, but since the German driver's resurgence in form, the pair have been more closely matched. Magnussen could well be higher on this list had he been a little bit more consistent, although admittedly the lack of consistency has been more related to the car at different circuits rather than the driver. Before we take a look at the top 10, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. According to my YouTube analytics, around 70% of you watching are not yet subscribed to the channel, so please make sure you hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying the videos. Number 10, Esteban Ocon. In 10th is Esteban Ocon, and if you look at the championship standings, you'd probably be wondering why he isn't higher than his teammate, given the Spaniard is a 2-time world champion and the Frenchman is 17 points ahead. But while Ocon has been far more consistent with 10-point scoring finishes from the opening 13 rounds, his teammate has faced a lot of bad luck this year. Regardless, I think Ocon is performing well. He's built on a strong 2021 season and has established himself in the Alpine team, and is rightly deserving of his multi-year deal. Ocon's best result was 5th in Austria after a strong qualifying sprint and race. He's doing well to ensure Alpine are right in the fight with McLaren. Number 9, Valtteri Bottas. Bottas is in 9th, and this driver has had a great season in the Alfa Romeo. He's reinvented himself in the sport as a driver that can compete in the midfield, and if it wasn't for the last few races where Alfa Romeo seem to have gone backwards relative to their midfield teams, I think he'd be above the next 2 drivers in this ranking. Bottas went to Alfa Romeo after being dropped by Mercedes, and it could have been the beginning of the end of his career. For me though, after this year so far, I think he's got many more seasons on the grid ahead of him given his performances. Number 8, Carlos Sainz. Next up is the first of the drivers in those top 3 teams. Carlos Sainz had a really disappointing start to the year, and it looked like he was struggling under the pressure of racing in a car with World Championship winning potential. He's certainly improved through the year and has had some excellent results. But in Australia, Sainz had issues in Q3 with the team struggling to get his car started, followed by his first lap time being deleted due to a red flag, and then a mistake on his final run left him down in 9th position. Not exactly brilliant for the Ferrari driver, and perhaps a sign of him struggling under the pressure. That race saw him enter the gravel trap on lap 1 as he tried to make up positions, and again, this is a sign that he was finding it difficult under the pressure. The race in Imola wasn't too much better, with Sainz out on lap 1 again, and while you could argue that it was bad luck for Sainz, he didn't show these kinds of disappointing performances in 2021. Sure, Sainz has had some bad luck at the same time. His engine failure in Austria was disappointing, as well as his failure in Azerbaijan. But for me, I think there are points that Sainz has left on the table this year so far. Number 7, Sergio Perez. Next up, it's Sergio Perez, and again, he's had some good races and some bad races so far in 2022. Early on in the year, it looked like he was on top form, with his pole position in Saudi Arabia and an excellent victory in Monaco. There was plenty of talk regarding Perez being a championship contender given his form and championship standings. But his abilities are just not quite the same as Max Verstappen, and as such he's dropped back relative to his world champion teammate. Particularly towards the end of the first half of the season, Perez seemed to disappear. His 4th place in France and 5th in Hungary were both examples of the Mexican driver being so far behind Verstappen and unable to deliver the results, as he seemed to be able to do earlier in the year. Perez is still the best option for Red Bull, as he's a good number 2, and given Ferrari seems to want to throw away the championship themselves, he's doing all he needs to do. Number 6, Lando Norris. Norris is in 6th for me, and it feels like he's fighting single-handedly for McLaren against Alpine for 4th in the standings. Norris is the only driver outside the top 3 teams that has scored a podium so far in 2022, and that's despite the fact that at the first race of the year in Bahrain, the McLaren car looked like it might not even finish. Norris is decidedly in the best of the rest spot and is scoring points on a regular basis. Not only this, but he's also convincingly beating Daniel Ricciardo for the 2nd year in a row, and is adding more pressure to the Australian driver and his future on the F1 grid. What we know for sure is that if McLaren had 2 Lando Norrises in the team, then they would be well ahead of Alpine in the standings. Number 5, Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso is in 5th, and the Spanish driver could have done so well if it wasn't for bad luck earlier in the season. The Alpine driver has caused a stir in the driver market for next year, but his talent is clear to see despite being 41 years old. A string of 4 non-point scoring finishes and retirements left the driver on 2 points after 5 rounds, while his teammate was on 24. But despite that, Alonso has started to pull it back, with a combination of the Alpine car being more consistent and Alonso's luck starting to turn. Personally, I think Alonso is proving why Aston Martin have made a move for the driver for 2022 to give him that multi-year deal. Number 4, Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton next, and I'm not sure if this is a harsh position in the rankings or not. Early on in the year, with Mercedes having difficulties with the W13, it was suggested that Hamilton was carrying additional sensors and trying different setups to gather more information for the team. This extra data would allow them to get on top of their porpoising problems and move closer to the 2 teams at the front of the order. So this may explain why he was behind Russell in terms of performance early on and remains behind in the standings. As a result of the hard work for the team and drivers, Hamilton's recent form has been particularly impressive. Going into the summer break, he's on a 5-podium streak, the longest of any driver on the grid right now, and that has included some impressive drives from Lewis Hamilton, such as his 7th to 2nd in Hungary and a strong drive at Silverstone, where at one stage he was in contention for the win. It's been a strong season for Hamilton, and if the suggestions made regarding the data gathering are true, he could have even been higher on this list. Number 3, George Russell. George Russell next, and this driver is doing an excellent job to prove himself in the Mercedes car for 2022. Russell's ability to seamlessly transition into the Mercedes setup has been impressive to say the least, and that's got to be a factor in choosing where he ranks for the first half of this year. Russell managed to achieve a top 5 finish in every race over the first half, aside from the British Grand Prix, where he retired after trying to support Zhou Guanyu following the crash. This consistency is impressive to say the least, and something that has allowed him to capitalise whenever an opportunity has arose. He scored 5 podiums so far, and even got that shock pole position in Hungary. His performances are clearly on the rise with the Mercedes team. I think that Russell could well get his first race win in these last 9 rounds based on his form so far. Number 2, Charles Leclerc. In second, I've gone with Charles Leclerc. The Ferrari driver has been excellent so far this year, and his disappointing results have predominantly come from either the team struggling to form a strategy or the car not being reliable. The early season lead in the championship was quickly eroded by Red Bull and Verstappen, but regardless, Leclerc has looked strong. He's been pretty unstoppable on a Saturday, but those challenges have meant that he's not been able to convert those pole positions into race wins. There have been signs in 2022 that have shown Leclerc's weakness. He's faced the bulk of the bad strategy decisions to this point, and often that's been down to Carlos Sainz actually refuting the team's strategy calls on the radio. Likewise, his mistake in France cost him dearly, and that meant he was unable to capitalise on that great position in a must-win event. On the whole though, I think Leclerc has performed well so far this year, but he has a mountain to climb if he wants to win his first title. Number 1, Max Verstappen. And that means the top driver so far in 2022 has got to be the championship leader. Max Verstappen has had an excellent season so far, and despite 2 DNFs which weren't his fault, he's still 80 points ahead in the championship at this point in the season. What has really impressed me with Verstappen this year is how much he's learned from 2021. There's a long way to go, but it seems like he's very much calmer now when he's in the lead of the championship. And given the gap to Leclerc, this championship is his to lose at this point in the season. I think we might see a dominant victory for Verstappen in 2022, and based on his form, he could absolutely achieve that. He has the potential to wrap this championship up with around 3 or maybe even 4 races to go, and he's looking comfortable out at the front. So those are my rankings based on the first half of the 2022 season. There's still a long way to go and plenty of time for these rankings to change, and if you want to learn more about a driver that has the potential to move up this list over the rest of the year, make sure you watch this video next.